Ah non, je croyais que tu parlais de...
Ça, c'est il y a aussi...
Vous parlez de ça?
Bien. Buenas tardes a todos. Antes de comenzar, les recuerdo que las salidas de emergencia están en la parte posterior de del primer piso del auditorio, derecha y izquierda, y les pido por favor que no obstruyan las escaleras ni los pasillos durante esta plática. Bien, pues nos da muchísimo gusto tener aquí hoy a Cédric Villani. Cédric necesita pocas presentaciones, ha hecho avances muy importantes en matemáticas, en física matemática, asociadas a algunas palabras clave que voy a decir, como ecuación de Boltzmann, amortiguamiento de Landau, optimización, transporte óptimo, curvatura de Ricci. Se ha interesado también no solo por las matemáticas, sino también por comunicarlas y también por el pasado, presente y futuro de las matemáticas. Y como muestra de esto, quiero citar algo que es sus novelas gráficas junto a Edmond Baudouin, que son Los soñadores lunares, acerca de 4 genios de la historia, y más recientemente La balada para un bebé robot. Tiene también, bueno, y quizás hubiera comenzado por esto. En el año 2010 le fue otorgada la medalla Fields por sus contribuciones a las matemáticas. Hoy, gracias a los esfuerzos de la Embajada de Francia en México, lo tenemos aquí. Le agradecemos particularmente a la embajadora Anne Griot por poder tener aquí a Cédric, y le agradecemos también a Catalina Stern, ya que la facultad nos recibe aquí con Cédric. Y pues no hablo más, con ustedes Cédric Villani.
Okay. Okay, everybody hear me well? Here, working, fine, good. Thank you, people. It's a great pleasure to be here for this lecture in which we are going to talk about mathematics and the rest. I want to put this out. How do I do? Who knows? Okay, let's remove it to be sure that there is no interference. So, I think title is something like Mathematics in the 21st Century. I defended my PhD at the very end of the 20th century, since it was 1998. And so my career as a mathematician, post-PhD, almost coincides with the beginning of 21st century. It's been going for 2 decades, but already I could see a number of changes and strong trends, as many of those in the audience with a bit of experience have seen. What are some of the main changes that we witnessed? First, we saw an increase in the number of mathematics worldwide, in the sense that there are more mathematicians nowadays than ever, more mathematical publications than ever, and larger number of fields and problems and subfields than ever. And it is continuing to grow. It comes, by the way, with great challenges for our publication system, for our universities, and so on. At the same time, as the request for mathematics and mathematicians increased, the problem of finding students in mathematics was not so easy to solve worldwide. And we have seen here and there, typically in developed economies in particular, the numbers of students that are motivated by mathematics go decreasing for a number of reasons, but it has been a worldwide problem. At the same time, a lot of moves and internationalization of mathematics. Emblematic moment was in 2014 when the International Congress of Mathematics in Seoul witnessed the fact that the 4 field medalists all had international stories. There was that Iranian female mathematician who was trained, who made part of her career in the US. There was an Indian mathematician making career in Canada and America. There was a guy who had a story in Switzerland and UK and Austria, etc. And there was, of course, French-Brazilian mathematicians. All 4 fields medalists there had some international, strong professional story, which was not just making some trips here and there, but really moving at some point in their career from one country to another. And it has gone increasing all throughout 21st century, this kind of things. We have witnessed, and during our trips to the famous American universities, the amount to which it became more and more international, with courses, more and more courses in the US in which there was a large majority of Chinese students, for instance, in the room. And globally, motions became very, very strong. We have seen also throughout this 21st century a number of connections between fields of mathematics that completely revamped the global picture. Most spectacular event was the famous proof by Grigori Perelman of the Poincaré conjecture, announced around 2002 and eventually accepted by the whole community a few years later after due verification, when Grigori Perelman received and refused the Fields Medal in 2006. And it was a very strong event about connection. It was not just that it was solving an important mathematical problem that was almost a century old. It was revamping the relations of geometry and analysis, because that very famous geometry problem about the shape of a possible three-dimensional universe was solved by a very fine analysis through partial differential equations in geometry, analysis of blow-up, etc. All throughout the world, in many places where there were these geometry teams that were not interested in analysis and sometimes saying, okay, the analysts are playing with their equations and so on, but it's not half as funny and exciting as what we can do with geometry. And then after the Perelman proof, they were going on saying, we need to hire some analysts to develop the geometrical analysis everywhere. And the status, the balance between the branches has been completely changed. And it was part of trends that saw increasing connections between the various fields. Part of my career was also in these connections. I started as a mathematical analyst, specialized in mathematical physics of plasma and gases. Then I kind of moved into, okay, mixture of analysis and probability, and then mixture of analysis, probability, and geometry. And was among a group of people who discovered strong connections between concepts of statistical physics, concepts of geometry and curvature in particular, and concepts of optimization, in particular concepts coming from economy. All put together had a big impact, and there I was, invited in conferences in geometry and so on. And worldwide in mathematics, a lot of these connections were taking place and reshaping the need for cooperation. But after having said all that, probably the most dramatic change in mathematics in the 21st century was in the relation to algorithmics and the fact that all these new developments from computer science were making use of advanced algorithmics to solve some deep and tricky problems. A phenomenon which is commonly known as artificial intelligence, which is now the big talk all worldwide, and which is the #1 reason for the fact that the job of mathematician has, in a few years, been considerably risen in interest and stature from the industry, but also the governments worldwide. A couple of years ago, yes, maybe a bit more than that, when was it? A few years ago, there were these regular studies made by some job observatory in the United States about the best job in the world, most sexy job in the year, and so on. And in the past few years, consistently, they ranked mathematician among the very top jobs. Mathematician and statistician. It occurred several times, even it occurred a couple of times that mathematician was ranked #1 job in their global ranking, taking into account influence, salary, interest, etc. What was the reason? Reason was that there were a lot of applications that were found that were requiring people with mathematical talent and mathematical expertise, and that literally there were billions to be made with these applications. And some of the most famous examples have been, of course, the internet search, and the reason it took off was that the founders of Google understood that an efficient way to look for information would be to handle the global web network as a kind of medium in which you are going to perform some random walk to discover automatically, by exploring randomly the state where was concentrating the interesting information. The kind of reasoning that you get from a mathematical expertise and mathematical touch, in particular mathematical physics. Random walks appeared by analogy with the physics in science and the need to explain the motions of atoms or molecules. And at some point, it was a very important mathematical tool to prove theorems. But now it was becoming an important tool to make billions, because from the properties of these random walks, you could organize the information, and from the information, you could have access to huge market applications. This was one example, and then many others would follow. Let me go on and give you a short tour of some of the trends of this recent field with the eyes of a mathematician. And let me insist that this field is not new, but was renewed. And good reason to insist on this field is that first, it is the one that has most strongly contributed to change the status of mathematician in the past few years. Second, it is the one that has come with the biggest opportunities and the biggest threats for the image of our discipline. And third, it has become also a stake of nation policy everywhere. First image, which is to make us think about the concept of algorithm and the use of mathematics in practical recipes. Here on the left is one of the most ancient examples known of algorithm, or at least results of algorithm. It's from this Babylonian tablet, maybe 4,000 years ago or something, in which a very precise value of square root of 2 is written, proving that even ancient Babylonians had very efficient algorithms to compute square root of 2. Let me insist that the amount of accuracy is like 10 to the minus 6, is such that they did not develop this for practical use. They developed this for maybe for the beauty of it, or for training, and discovering that with mathematics, you can go to artificial accuracy, and that is the amazing thing. Now, algorithms were subject of a lot of developments throughout the history of mankind, but they became really dramatic with the rise of modern computing at the middle of the century, and played a key role in the world history when they had a central role in the Second World War. This picture is drawing extracted from one of the works that you mentioned that I did with drawer Edmond Baudouin about the moonshine talkers. And this is Alan Turing. By the way, there is a Spanish version of that comics. And here Alan Turing is reflecting over his role in the war and the future. Now, it was the first time that the political history of the world was depending on the quick solution of an algorithmic problem, or rather, finding a very efficient algorithm to do something. And we know the essence of algorithmic science is, first, find recipe to make mathematical constructions automatically, and second, decides which are the fast recipes and which are the slow recipes. And finding the fast recipes can be a matter of life and death. And now, all of our modern development in algorithmic is about these two things, which are the ways to achieve the construction of a mathematical object and how to do it fast. And the main lesson that we learned in the past few decades is that there are many, many things that we can do algorithmically that we did not suspect, and that these things can be done much faster than we thought. This is an image taken from the strange book called Six, which describes the world of high-frequency trading, full of algorithms that nobody really understands, fighting against each other, in a kind of spectacular view of how abstraction can lead some human businesses. And by the way, the author also describes how in this world of trading, a lot of high-level jobs were replaced by technicians in relations with algorithmics. And it's one of the best examples to see how classical jobs can be wiped out when there is a technological wave. Now it is much of a debate with artificial intelligence, but before artificial intelligence was there, it was also a debate in some fields. And this is part of the long rise of algorithms. Now, artificial intelligence is a field that was born in the 50s. This is the cover of the main reference in the subject, Russell and Norvig, at least for beginners. And you can recognize the picture of Alan Turing on the left corner, who is also considered, he's one of the most brilliant mathematicians in the 20th century, but also one of those who started artificial intelligence at the same time as other people like his American alter ego, Claude Shannon. Turing was fascinated by the idea that by understanding, by that programming some of the things that we do, we could understand better our brain. And that was the start of the program of artificial intelligence, started shortly after the death of Alan Turing, with the view to reproduce the cognitive processes going on in the human brain through algorithms. It was understood after some time that the task was much too demanding and that human cognitive processes were very mysterious, and to this day we are still unable to reproduce them by algorithms. But there was a shift in the goals, and the initial goals was transformed into, let's give ourselves some sophisticated tasks with very precise objectives, and let's achieve them through algorithmics. And for that, it was discovered that algorithms can be extremely good. Now, let us also say that artificial intelligence is an algorithmic problem. You have a complicated task and you want to solve it. But it also poses a lot of questions and debates, some of them of philosophical nature, like what is it? How far can we go with the concept of intelligence? And is there one day a possibility to reproduce the human intelligence or something that will be as intelligent as a human? Most experts in the field will tell you that this is, for the moment, science fiction. And a few of the minority believes that it is for rather soon. There come also all the rest. The fact that if algorithms are able to do some tasks which the humans were doing, then they may replace the human tasks in many respects. And that has caused a lot of discussion. Last year, at the Web Summit conference in Lisbon, which is like one of these world events of convergence where people from the government meet the people from the tech, etc., and information worldwide, and this was the talk of everybody. How are the jobs how will the jobs be replaced by the algorithms, etc. And there has been a lot of publications with that. Let's go a little more in the AI, or artificial intelligence, job and ask what it means. First, question about intelligence is to find, when you want to find some intelligent solution, you want to optimize, that is, find some good solution with respect to some objective. And you also typically want to apply it in situation that depends on a lot of parameters. And how to optimize? All of a sudden, it becomes part of the field of optimization, which has a long history, but for which there are not many general methods. By far, the most popular method for optimizing is to use gradient flow, which means, roughly speaking, if you have to find the highest point in a landscape, you will try to always go up and follow the highest gradient until you reach some summit. This is very, very crude because you can be trapped in a local optimum. And there are a number of methods to put this in combination with some dose of randomness to avoid this. But it's amazing that even this very simple principle is one still the most popular when it comes to optimization for very sophisticated and popular algorithms. I will come back to it later, but with all the buzz that there was recently about neural networks and their amazing applications, the theory is all relying on gradient flow. Other way to optimize is to use competition and to mimic natural selection. And this also was made. Probability, stochastic, Monte Carlo was put on top of all this. And linear optimization is a particular subfield of optimization in which problems and methods are linear and in which more methods are available. Second thing about intelligence is learning. You say that something is intelligent when it is able to adapt and to improve from knowledge. One of the oldest experiments of learning in an automated system is this automated mouse by Claude Shannon. You can see the movie online. It's hilarious. And you see the mouse, which was called Theseus, that learns his way out of the labyrinth. And since then, there have been this development of a number of methods trying to learn in various ways from experience. To the point that most experts of artificial intelligence nowadays prefer to be called experts in machine learning, which is the automated learning process. Now, why is it tricky in applications? When you have to take into account a number of parameters, you immediately encounter this curse of dimensionality that the problem that you are trying to optimize is not set in 3 or 4 or 5 dimensions, but in a space of many dimensions. Think of the problem of recognizing the numbers automatically. If your numbers are written as in the old-fashioned ways, you see the clock that there is in this room, it's very easy to recognize 114 or 115 because it's very much normalized. And there is only a small finite number of possibilities that you have to recognize from. But if it is handwritten and digitalized like this, then there are thousands and thousands and thousands, billions actually, of possibilities to write the number 6. How will you recognize them without putting all the possibilities? Here is another problem. In semantics, when you try to give a kind of cartography mapping of the various meanings that you can have, then your space can be of dimension 300, several hundred, and so on. How are you going to do optimization in a space of dimension 300? People in master classes, they tell you already that in dimension 6 it becomes to be very hard going to Monte Carlo methods, etc. But here it will be 300, or it can be even more, thousands sometimes. Here is another way that the curse of the dimensionality can occur, the related way of combinatorics. For instance, problem of tree reconstruction, be it in decision making or in some applications in biology or whatever. Here I took an example that is dear to my heart, and because it was a subject of research in biological mathematical research recently, imagine that you want to find the genealogical tree of the spider species, even if you just take a few hundreds of them that could be sampled among the many, many species of spiders, then the number of possible trees is more than 10 to the 1,000. It's way, way more than the numbers of atoms in the visible universe, and there is no way you can explore them all. So you have to, in that problem or in this other problem, you have to find a solution that will lead you, an algorithm that will lead you to a good solution, even if you are exploring just a tiny bit of the space of possibilities. Just a tiny, tiny bit, because it is so, so large. So you have to be clever. Add to this the problem of data. Okay, we all know and we learn that it's not easy to gain wisdom from knowledge, and also that it's not easy to gain knowledge from information. Nowadays, information is all around, but there is too much information, and it's so difficult to recognize what we should retain. But already is crazy the amount of data that there is all around, made with all kinds of sensors, and from which you want to take the information. One of the main features of science in 21st century is that data have arrived. in the sense that amounts of available information from which to draw the conclusions has grown like crazy, is still growing exponentially, which is the reason why in a couple of years you produce more data than from the ever in the history of mankind before, because it's exponential growth. The beliefs which are behind all the techniques of big data analysis around are these two. First, even if you have an enormous number of parameters, maybe it's several hundreds, it will all boil down to a small number of interesting parameters. Maybe 4, 5, 6, 10, but not 100. And second, these parameters, we may let the algorithm discover them, or organize them, or understand how they are related to the amounts of data, with the ability to learn without being explicitly programmed. Let's take an example for the first, which was very spectacular and went into public scrutiny a couple of years ago. Models of personality. A personality of a human being is something that is extraordinarily complex. And you would imagine it can depend on hundreds or thousands of parameters. But if you want to do something with humans, you don't need to know all their personality. Maybe a few traits are enough. If you are in the industry, you want to know about your consumers, what kind of products they will buy, what kinds of reaction they will have. You wonder what will be the most efficient thing to satisfy your customers, etc. And so on. And people studied and found out, and it was a combination of mathematics and social sciences, that you can make reasonable, interesting models of personality based on just 5 parameters. It sounds grossly small, but it works in the sense that working in the algorithms with these 5 parameters, you can make algorithms that convince people depending on their personality, or that manipulate them, that satisfy them, and so on. And it has been part of the public scandal about the past elections, be it in the American presidential elections or the Brexit vote, and it's still debated whether manipulation which went on through some of these techniques did have some effect or not. It's very clear nowadays that technically you can do enormous manipulation using these kind of methods, because you will recognize the personality of the consumers based on their interaction with the internet, and you will be able then to manipulate them. It has been proven that with just a few dozen clicks, you can determine with very high probability in the US whether the person who clicked is black or white, or votes Democrat, or votes Republican. It's very humbling to realize how much humans depend on these few parameters. We thought that to understand what goes in our brain, it would require so much information, but actually, with 50 clicks, you know with quite a good probability what kind of person you will react. Now, with this in mind, what are the goals that people are pursuing when they want to put in mathematics these complex tasks? The goals may be to compress, like you have this enormous information and you want to reduce it to something that is small and you can retain. The goals can be to recognize. Imagine you have this big amount of medical data coming from various devices and you want to put them together to recognize whether there is a pathology or what is the amount of, how serious is some disease, for instance. Or you want to react, like if you want to put your car in algorithmic, you want that the car is able to avoid other cars when it drives, that it can accelerate or decelerate, etc., depending on the situation. You want to be able to generalize, whether it is to interpolate between two known situations or to extrapolate. All these are various ways to interpret the word understand. And let's be clear, in all these mathematical developments, it's not about understanding in the sense that we think primarily, where we understand that we are living in some world with people around, etc. And then our analysis comes on top of that general knowledge. In this case, algorithms are able to do the analysis, but don't understand the general picture. They will be able to understand what kind of disease it is, but they don't understand what is a disease, what is a person, neither what is desirable or not. They will analyze, do these precise tasks. And it has been amazing to see how the algorithms were very good at doing this very fine specialized job and very bad at doing the common sense, global understanding of the world, differentiating their intelligence from ours very much. Here are some of the classical applications. Recognize automatically images. You've all seen and used this typical recognition. Now, my phone, like the cell phone of many people, in front of some image or landscape will automatically say, like, oh, this is a landscape or this is a portrait. Recognize what it is. And sometimes it will give you what confidence interval it goes with. Examples of generation are in the generation of pictures or generations of songs or whatever. An example that has changed common life is translation. Couple of days ago, I was in St. Petersburg looking for my way. And there was a guy on the street. I asked him, where can I find the cathedral? And showed him the image of the cathedral. Guy did not speak French, did not speak English. So he took his phone, and on the device, he wrote it in Russian, and it was automatically translated in English so that I could understand what was the way. This gives new ways to communicate between people. Now, this translating machine has learned how to translate, but has no idea about the meaning of the church or the words in general. It is just applying some automated and very efficient algorithms of automatic translation, whose ingredient number one is statistics. And with this is a good example of how the mathematics combined with the technology can transform the life, but also of how the field math will be transformed by the use. I will come back to this. Here are some other fields of applications. Of course, self-driving cars. Of course, in the medical field, these prosthetics that will adapt to the morphology. Some crazy experiments include things like control devices just by thought, which is still experimental, but with some experience. You will be able to control the drones just by thinking of which direction he should go. And there is nothing mysterious, like the device will make some correlations between the trajectory of the drone and the kind of patterns that go in your brain. And there will be some learning. So one of the most crazy projects that I've seen among the past few years was a project trying to eventually, say, let's in a few decades, give back sight to people which have become blind. A crazy project in which you train the brain to react with some drug that will be sensitive to the light, and some light transmission depending on what you see you don't see, but there will be the lenses here. So here analysis, partly hardware, partly software, resulting in some light signals that are shown to your brain and that will react. Completely crazy. But all the bricks are there. Mixture of biology, chemistry, physics, and software algorithmics, mathematics, whatever, all combined together. And this kind of experiment shows you well the new position of mathematics as a facilitator for other projects. Okay. Are there some impacts that the mathematics can have on other sciences which are new? The answer is yes. And we all know how mathematics transformed other fields, starting from physics, but then moving to biology, etc. Also, the recent big data developments do have some non-trivial conclusion and implications in other sciences. Here is an example that was in the news in biology a couple of years ago that we can all understand. Through big data analysis, it was discovered that there is not one but 4 species of giraffe. They all look alike, but when you look their analysis of genomics, you see that it clusters in 4 different parts. And the resulting article in which it is explained why you should believe so is all filled with keywords such as convergence of Monte Carlo Markov chain and fine statistics analysis that very few biologists are trained to understand. Based on a software that uses, these are keywords, Bayesian Monte Carlo Markov chain inference package, with a wide range of coalescent models, including the use of temporally sampled sequences. Now with this, we see that the mathematics, modern algorithmics has exported also in other sciences. Mathematics recently is being tried to overcome one of the most famous mysteries in biology, which is making the connection between the genotype and the phenotype. Genotype is the sequence of A, B, A, C, G, T, etc. Phenotype is the result, what we see, our proteins, our functions, our traits, etc. And it's so difficult to connect them. And the statistical approach to that is conceptually depressingly simple. Like, let's consider that there is a function to learn, which is the function that maps the genotype onto the phenotype. And let's use mathematical learning or machine learning to emulate or reproduce this function by giving the algorithm a large number of couples, genotype, phenotype, genotype, phenotype, and see how it runs. And here is the kind of results. So in this demonstration, the researcher shows how, based on the genetic code, the algorithm will reconstruct what face you should have. You can do this in principle with the DNA of your baby if you are a pregnant woman. And the algorithm will give you the face that your son or daughter will have as a grown-up. Interesting and scary. Here is a comparison with the two. You see here he applied it to himself. And so there are a few differences because he let his beard grow, which the algorithm did not know. And also he likes the good eating, which the algorithm did not know. But it's very close, and it will go on improving and improving. Imagine all the challenges that it causes. Will there be need to have a law that forbids to have this kind of analysis so that to make sure that we don't evolve into a society in which we select our kids depending on their physical traits? Will there be a need for new experts that will be able to testify in court that the face which has been reconstructed from the DNA on the crime is that the algorithm is efficient? You see all the kinds of new problems that will appear. And maybe you can even imagine that You get some, I don't know, you put these DNA stuff into, let's imagine the most nightmare that you want. You reconstruct from this kind of thing the faces of all people with a certain genetic mutation, and you are a terrorist and you build your drone in such a way that it will try to find and kill people who have this face, so that you want to eradicate some ethnic. Scary. Not so far from being technologically feasible. With these kind of things, we have to be, of course, very much interested in the applications and also make sure that algorithms are used for good purpose. Okay, a bit more on how does it work. Yeah, let's not take too much about this. But still, some of the ingredients. First, if you go to Wikipedia or whatever, and you ask what is the theory of artificial intelligence, first surprise will be that there is a number of different techniques, so that you cannot say that it's one technique or another. And second surprise will be that all of them rest on simple grounds. The most famous advanced neural networks methods rest on very simple theory. What is tricky and interesting is the way you use it and the way you calibrate things and the tricks. But the basic theory remains simple. And there are deep, big theoretical mysteries in there, which is an interesting change of paradigm from historically. When computers were invented, their first task was to solve differential equations. There was a good theory for differential equations, and people wanted to compute the solutions. Von Neumann, Shannon, Turing, they were all fascinated with the solutions of differential equations and partial differential equations. Nowadays, we're able to compute solutions of a lot of things, but we don't understand the theory behind. I told you about one of the methods of random walk. I told you about Google. Let's see how it works in practice for the Google type algorithm. The very basic principle is very simple, but needed a mathematical mind. And it will go down history as one of the occasions in which mathematical thinking changed our day-to-day life. So in the PageRank, which was the first baby model of Google algorithm, you say, okay, there is information all around, and that information is hidden in the web somewhere because people have the information. But I want to know where that information is most concentrated. Now, these are the web pages pointing at each other, because when you are on the internet, when you want to attract the attention of people to something interesting, you make a pointer, which is an HTML link. And let's imagine that it's a bit as in scientific publication. When people are most pointed at, it means that there is some interesting thing. So let us try to discover among the web pages that talk of a subject, which are the ones that are most pointed at in some sense, most connected. Not easy. Look at this and think that your system of web pages, there may be 1 million of them. So let's go on with the algorithmic solution. Imagine that you send a number of digital random walkers on your graph here, and it will go randomly from node to node. This is random walk on graphs, and it has been a subject of development throughout the 20th century. All throughout the 20th century, random walks in which your system goes randomly from one direction to another were used for developing lots of things in mathematics. And the big change in 21st century is not that there was a new theory of it, but the fact that it was applied to these problems at such scale. So let's go with these random walkers and see where they have the most tendency to accumulate. And the philosophy of PageRank was to say, that is where I will look first for finding the information. In this case, we see the two nodes which are most preferred by the work, and so which will be the ones designated by the algorithm. Okay, see here, you may think at the beginning that if we want to understand where the interesting information is, we need to have some understanding of the way the graph is organized. But where is the understanding here? We forgot it. Just use randomness and see how the solution emerges from the chaos. And a lot of the developments in the past decades in artificial intelligence, in the past decade, have been also about this. Let's forget about understanding structure. Let's go with the statistics and see what emerges. It was humiliating in a way. Think of artificial translation. People had been working hard on the semantics and how to organize the understanding of the grammar, etc. And it never was very good. And then arrived other people that said, okay, look, it's a problem of reconstructing a function from the text in French to the text in English, maybe. Let's give a lot of examples to the system, and let's use statistical procedures so that it can reconstruct the function automatically. And it worked much better. Of course, eventually, there will be need to combine the understanding approach with the statistic approach. And in the field of physical sciences, for instance, and industry, there will be need to combine the classical model approach in which you look for equations and understanding of the equation, and the statistical approach in which you only look for examples. But so far, examples and learning by examples has been humiliatingly efficient. Let's skip all this. And here are some images. These are pictures extracted from the seminar which was held in Collège de France a couple of years ago, when there was a seminar by Yann Lequin, one of the world's most known experts in artificial intelligence. And after the seminar, some mathematicians, more theoretical than Yann, were invited to give discussions on their thoughts of artificial intelligence. Here is one of these problems. Here is Stéphane Malat, one of the famous French mathematicians, working hard to apply the tools of harmonic analysis to help and improve the automatic recognition of images, with the main goal, discover which are the subjects and images that will be recognized easily and quickly, and which are the ones which will not be possible. So far, basically, he was unable to find anything significant, which is humiliating also. Here is one of my former colleagues, Yann Olivier. I did some research with him, and he was trained in a mixture of geometry and probability, expert in random graphs, and one day he moved to artificial intelligence and saying, I want to find the theory behind it and put geometry behind it, understanding. Well, what success? Not much. He did write some beautiful papers and beautiful observations, but very, very far from some geometrical understanding of the reasons why these algorithms converge. Deep mystery in there. Mathematics for the 21st century. Find a theory about what we can learn and what we can not learn. Here is another example. So this is Emmanuel Candes, International Congress of Mathematicians, Seoul 2014. For the first time, an expert in artificial intelligence was giving a plenary lecture in this International Congress of Mathematicians, sign of the times. Emmanuel Candes is a French mathematician working in American university, which is very often the case in this field, unfortunately. Here is a Netflix problem he's explaining. Imagine you have information about preference matrix. User 1 likes the film number 6, etc. And you know that some users have liked some movies to some degree, and you want to complement the matrix. That's called the Netflix problem, and it's about reconstructing the information. There are hundreds of algorithms that can handle this, and there have been big competitions about how to do this. Many philosophies to do it. Candace is an expert of one of these techniques called parsimony, in which you try and reconstruct the matrix, assuming that it stems from the smallest dimensionality that is possible. Maybe a matrix whose rank is as small as possible and things like this, or whose norm is as minimal as possible. It's amazingly simple, the kind of criteria that work in some cases. And he has shown, for instance, in some real matrix, that you can reconstruct sometimes 100% of the missing information just by guess. And he showed that this is the case. They showed that this is the case, ingredients for success. If solutions are structured, that is, they eventually depend on the small numbers of efficient parameters, and you have methods for an efficient method for optimizing among all possible solutions, and there is no bias or there is incoherence in the statistics that you are looking for. That is, there will be no bias in your sampling. This is also a typical example of 21st century mathematical problem, in which you try to give a mathematical theory explaining some of the success of modern-day algorithmics, showing and trying to estimate how many entries you will need to know for the success. Candace went on to show that applying these techniques of minimal norm reconstruction, you are able to reconstruct images with very little information. For instance, you make the Fourier transform of some image, you throw away 95% of the Fourier transform, and from the 5% that are remaining, you are able to reconstruct all the rest. It works if what you throw out was random, and if the image that you took was something structured, maybe an image from a living body with some organs. And he showed how you can apply this in collaboration with medical doctors to divide by almost 10 the time that you have to stand in a device, the time that you spend in a device by magnetic nuclear resonance to get your image. That is also a typical example of 21st century collaboration of mathematicians with other fields. It's a collaboration that requires working closely with teams that are interdisciplinary on the problem. It's not that you have the theory and then the application comes. It's that you have to mix the teams so that the application can be developed. And it's a trend that is growing more and more nowadays. I think I kind of over-timed. Who is the master of the time here around? What is the situation? Should go ahead? Okay, let me just spend 5 more minutes, and then there will be a few questions maybe, on an event that made the headlines recently in artificial intelligence, and which was this Go problem that you all heard about. What can we say about it? First, I told you about the neural networks. What is a neural network? Something that tries to mimic the kind of device that nature has put in place for encoding our intelligence, which are the neural networks, in which each unit is very simple and makes a very simple operation, but the combination can be highly complex due to the choice of connections. In this case, imagine that each of these boxes would stand for a neuron, and there is connection from one neuron to another. Each neuron may be connected to many other neurons. Some of the connections will be strong and others will be weak. Each neuron receives information from some other neuron. Information is in the form of some number, intensity of the signal. And through the canal, there will be a wave. For instance, if the canal is thin, you will perceive the influence in a small way. If it is large, in a larger way. You do the integration of all this, and then you decide to transmit the signal or not, like something binary. Or usually it will be with the sigmoid function, there will be some kind of threshold. This operation is very simple. But the combination of them can be very complicated. And in this, you start with an image. Maybe you take some basic Fourier transform of it, low mode, high mode, etc. And each of these gives you numbers, and you make these numbers go through a cascade of simple operations like this. In the end, you have some output. What is the output? You are trying here to emulate a function. And the output may be a word. For instance, cat if the image is a cat, tree if the image is a tree, etc. And in a neural network, you start with some, we have a bank of examples maybe, and you try to make sure that your neural network reproduces the examples. You give it examples like xy, like y is the image of x, and you want it to be able to emulate the function f, which is unknown. And you arrange the coefficients through some descent algorithm so that it matches. Okay, principle is simple. Then there are many complications and tricks. Here is the paper, the scientific paper corresponding to the experiment that made the headlines worldwide. When this Go algorithm beat one of the most famous Go players in the world. When I started my career, or even later, I mean 10 years ago, when I was discussing with people who were experts in probability and automating games, they were telling things like, you know, Go is very tricky, amazingly interesting, because it's very difficult to encode which are the good strategies in Go. And the combinatorics is monster, and this should be approached in a probabilistic way. I remember a conversation with Bendelin Werner about this. And it was a surprise to everybody when this Go algorithm was obtained. How does it work? Vexingly efficient, as I say. So, how does it go into the kind of network, neural network that we are saying? Well, if you want to program your Go algorithm, basically you try to emulate the function that maps the configuration to the next move. In this configuration, I do this move. In this other configuration, I do that move, etc. So start with a lot of examples from the grandmasters, all the games that they played, feed this into the neuron algorithm so that it learns to reproduce the moves of the grandmaster. If you do this, it will never be better than the grandmasters. So then you have to use more power. That is what they call reinforcement, and which goes in the exploration of other configurations. And in this way, the program was able to find some moves that humans never thought of. In one that was particularly commented, commentators, when they first saw what the algorithm had played, they believed it was a mistake. It looked like completely out of the box, maybe beginner's mistake or whatever. The human player was so much destabilized that he had to leave go out, light some cigarette or whatever. Like, what is this? It turned out it was an absolutely great move. Nobody had thought about it, which shows that these algorithms can be creative. Not necessarily efficiently, because to find this move beforehand, to find the strategy. The algorithm had made a number of computations that no human will be able to ever make. Even if you put all mankind thinking for millions of years, it would not suffice. So it's brute in some sense. But in the end, you find something more on the theory. Treaties of Go that will be written 10 years from now cannot be the same as those of now. And algorithm has changed this. Let me also mention that later, and you may have read about this in the newspapers, they made another version of the Go that did not even need it to start with the human knowledge. Started from zero. It was able to be very efficient and even to beat the first program that would beat the humans. Very interestingly, in this case, as in many other cases of artificial intelligence, we end up discovering something about ourselves. And examples have been in all fields. But in this case, we discovered, as Demis Hassabis, the creator of this program, insisted, we discovered that we humans are much worse players of Go than we believed. We believed we were great. People were even making theory about it. Eventually, we discovered we are not nearly as good as we thought. And it will be the case for a number of other fields. Let me not say more. And yes. This is also a typical book of the 21st century in math. I was mentioning it moments ago for a mathematical audience. With the big powers of algorithms, we have come to realize, and industry has come to realize, and governments have come to realize that mathematics has great power for many applications. At the beginning of this lecture, I showed you the image about mathematics and algorithmics being used in finance. And you remember how in 2008 there were all these big debates about the world crisis and how mathematical algorithms were involved in it. But now it's the same with all subjects. That great power can be used for good or for bad. And mathematician Cathy O'Neill has argued in this book that it can do a lot of harm. She chose to focus on the dark side, also to compensate for the fact that there are so many people focusing on the bright side. And it's good to balance things a bit. You see the subtitle, How Big Data Increases Inequality and Threatens Democracy. And it's a book that takes example after example and analyzes them in a very thorough way. In some cases, the harm is done through poor ethics. In other cases, it is done through clumsiness and lack of competence. Either way, we need to be aware of this. It was, for a long time, there was debate about whether statistics should be considered as part of mathematics or outside mathematics. In America, very often they say, in the United States of America, they would say statistics is apart from the math, but in France, we consider statistics is part of math. The reason being that you cannot apply statistics if you don't know about the problem you are working on. And there are famous examples of great statisticians who arrived at the wrong conclusions because they applied their statistical theory to fields that they did not know of. And now, with the subject of algorithms, modern algorithm, it's a bit the same. You cannot apply it well if you don't know well the field that you are working on, and analyze the performance in light of it and work with people from the field. This poses new responsibilities, but also new challenges for organization. There is a lot of need of mathematicians in the industry. in sectors in which the algorithms are being used. And there is need for these bridges more than ever, so that the communication, the ethics, the way to apply will be more and more part of what is mathematics. This has already started to be an important trend in the 21st century, and it will continue to do so for sure. That's all. Thank you.
Bien, tenemos tiempo para un par de preguntas.
Well, hi. Can you hear me? Yeah. Well, all these mathematical applications are very interesting, impressive, and even scary. But let's go back to the start. What do you recommend to someone who's beginning in the study of mathematics nowadays?
What do I recommend to somebody doing mathematics study nowadays and wanting to go and explore some of this? First, there is not one kind of mathematician, there are many kinds. And even in respect to these kind of fields, there are many kinds of mathematicians. Some of them will try, like some of my friends, to first be very much expert in some directions of mathematics and then try to use their expertise for the theory of this. Some others will want to directly try and experiment from the algorithms, from the programs. If you want to explore this field, you need to go a lot in the experiments and projects and to find some cases, people who are working on some applications or things like this. Or you have to play with this, etc. But it's a field in which the knowledge gained from experiment is fundamental. Worldwide, it is tricky to organize. And in some places, they are moving very aggressively into this. In some other places, they are staring, like, what should we do? One case in point that I encountered when I was working on a report for the government, French government on this, was the MIT Harvard joint training between people, students of law and students of algorithmics. In this particular training, they put people on projects in which they work together in teams to solve some problem related to application of law through algorithms. There may be a number of problems, like in the logical analysis of the web of laws, if I may say, or in the so-called predictive justice, in which you try to determine automatically a guess of what would be the penalty for this or that. It may be about the way to automatically find the relevant law articles in a big body of laws corresponding to some problem. It may be about automatically write some legal documents or templates for documents. So there are a number of possibilities. But to develop them, you really have to have this contact, interdisciplinary contact.
Tenemos tiempo para otra pregunta.
And I will add, within mathematics, let's say within classical mathematics, the fields which are closer are those of statistics, random processes, optimization, Monte Carlo in general, plus a little bit of other things.
Hello. What's your opinion on this quote from Albert Einstein. How can it be that mathematics, being after all a product of human thought, which is independent of experience, is so admirably appropriate to the objects of reality?
It's a big mystery, but that is one of the beauty of the world and the science, that the universe can be understood. Well, remember that Einstein was working in physics, mathematical physics, fields in which there has been amazing success in discovering mathematical laws for the universe. And it's true when you think of all the variety of situations that there is in the world and of systems wherever. It's amazing to think that it will boil down to a small number of equations. It's a bit, remember, I was saying all the big assumption in big data analysis is that from this whole variety of possibilities, it all boils down to a small number of parameters. And when it goes to astrophysics, for instance, people will tell you, yeah, it all boils down to this parameter, that parameter, just a small number of parameters, or maybe 10 parameters, but not 1,000. That is a mystery. Now, one has to be careful also with the fact that for biologists, life sciences in general, situation is much less satisfactory. And so far, the best experts in theory worldwide have failed to find some good general concepts on which to build the biology, apart from a lot of description of what is going on. And it's also amazing to realize that the connection between physics and mathematics has given rise to a large number of illuminating mathematical concepts. Some of the people I know in this room have been experts in analysis of dynamical systems and so on, in which concepts from physics have been masterpieces in mathematics. But so far, study of biology led to almost no new concept in mathematics. Okay, neuron networks may be an exception, but it shows that so far we seem to have failed in finding the great concepts and tools to explain things like self-organization of living matter, appearance of organ functions, I don't know, good theory of disease and repair, and so on. And we don't know how things will evolve in the future in this respect. Computer theoretician Leslie Valiant has argued in a beautiful, even if a bit obscure book, that there should be a deep connection between the evolution of life and the emergence of patterns in artificial intelligence recognition processes, and that the combination of statistics and complexity theory should be key to understand these things. And he expresses the view that some fundamental facts about the universe organization are still very far from our understanding. So this, with this in mind, time will tell, hopefully, whether the Albert Einstein quote also applies to the big field of life sciences or human activities and so on. Okay, thank you.